We look around, but we do not see. We hear all these sounds, but fail to listen. We talk the talk so eloquently, but when the time comes to walk the walk, we just turn a blind eye. We have become an audience like those who sit around soccer fields with nice comfy seats and plenty of food and drinks to last for the game. We have become an audience who just sits on the sidelines. We're the audience to the cries of those who cry for justice, wondering if justice was ever just, because now it's just them and their Lord.
Salaam Alaykum, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of The Rogue Muslim. I am happy to have you here, and I hope everyone's week has been going well. I hope life is treating you well. Man, again, these introductions, man, I never know what to say. I should probably script it, but I don't really like doing that. This week's episode is, I think, a crucial one. It's on mental health and Islam. And now we've broken it up into two parts. The first part that my guest, Sumayya and I will be discussing is basically it's like a foundational one. We just want to understand what exactly is mental health and the difference between mental health and mental illness, and some of the conversations that are happening or do happen around mental illnesses. The second part, which we'll do later on, will pertain most specifically to Islam and mental health. It's definitely something that isn't discussed as much, and there's a lot of shame and stigma associated with mental illness and about discussing it, about opening up about it. And so I want to join the discussions and the work that's being put out there already by Muslim folks and non-Muslim folks around mental health and mental illnesses, and contribute to it and make it more normalized to be able to come forth and discuss it, and to understand for both those, like the insiders and the outsiders going through a mental illness right now, as to what can be done to support the folks. And again, mental illness has a spectrum, and it ebbs and flows. So you may have one at one point in your life, and you may not have one at another point in your life, and you may get one at one point in your life. So I think it's a discussion that needs to be had for the health of all humanity. And I hope that the conversation that we have today is something that is one of support and allows for certain voices to be heard, I guess. And we get into things like social media and its impacts on mental health. What are the current conversations happening around a debate between mainstream healing versus naturopathic healing? What else do we talk about? We talk about a range of things, but I do hope it's one that's a fruitful one. And if you know anyone that could benefit from the podcast, I'd love for you to share it with them. And this is something that, originally I intended for us to only have a 1 or 2 episode conversation about mental health and mental illness, but I'd posted on my Facebook that I was wanting to do a podcast on this, and I got quite a few comments and connections, etc., on the topic. So I think it's something that I will continue to discuss and represent on the podcast in the upcoming future, because it's not something that's talked about, and it's not something that's necessarily accessible. And I just want to add as many voices as I can to the current environment surrounding mental illness and mental health. So with your help, I hope I can do that. And if you have any connections, any resources, any comments, questions, feel free to message me in whatever way you choose. You can do it through email, through Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And whatever you say will definitely be held in with confidentiality. It's just something that would allow me to better understand what needs to be unpacked and what potential future podcast episodes could look like, and to what we could have discussions around. So I think that is my introduction for this podcast. As usual, I have like things I want to talk about. Guys, okay, so social media. I have been on social media so much recently. I'm somebody who always only had a Facebook page, and I was very much content with that. But recently, with things I'm involved with, I've ended up having 2 Facebooks, 3 Instagrams, and 2 Twitter accounts. And it's freaking exhausting. Good Lord. It's, I find myself consumed by just thinking about social media and how many likes, whatever platform I'm using, and for whatever reason, is whatever. God, I'm just consumed by likes right now. Okay. I wake up, I look at my social media immediately. I go to bed, I look at social media before. Throughout the day, I'm looking at social media or thinking about social media and thinking about what I can do next. And it's exhausting, and I don't like it. I don't think it's healthy at all. So I'm wondering if you have experiences with this. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm not isolated in this feeling and the exhaustion. So if you do have any comments on how I can better navigate all these social media platforms that I'm now a part of, I would sincerely appreciate it. That being said, feel free to share this podcast on whatever social media platforms you are on and tag me in it. My handles are just @TheRogueMuslim. So I was in bed and I had a realization, and or to quote the esteemed Professor Kylie Jenner, I feel like this year is like really about like just the year of realizing stuff. Awkward Valley Girl accent. But yeah, I had like an existential podcasting realization where, how people get obsessed with researching a topic, and, they'll pull all-nighters for it, or they'll stay up till the wee hours of the morning researching the topic. I realized that happens to me, but with people. Like, I just get obsessed with people. Recently, it was Benjamin Zand, because I heard him on a BBC documentary podcast, and I just loved his story, the story that he was telling. And then I just became obsessed with hearing, the other things he's discussed and talked about, and his perspectives and the interviews he's given. Like, I'm just so driven by people's perspectives and stories. And so, I realize that this podcast just gives my stalking a legitimate rationale behind it, and I'm kind of here for it. Well, obviously, but that was something that I realized, and then my sister was like, "Cool story, bro. Tell it again." But it was a moment for me, And speaking of people that I am obsessed with, and this is not a Muslim person, and doesn't have to do with Islam, other than the fact that it's charity to even smile. But Alison Hammond, she went viral. She interviewed Harrison Ford and Ryan Gosling recently, and she is hilarious. Like, honestly, I just became obsessed with her. I watched every other interview she's done. I watched like best Alison Hammond moments and all these fangirl accounts. I think I would fangirl if I ever saw her. She's just incredible. She's so hilarious. Her and Joe Lycett. Joe Lycett is hilarious, another comedian. You should check them out. They're really funny, and they could contribute to your mental health, because laughing is always good for it. What else did I want to talk to you about? listening to this podcast, I put out on my Facebook page, I think, that if you ever want to torture me, like if CSIS, the Canadian version of the CIA, I think, if CSIS ever wants to torture me, just make me listen to my podcast. It's cringy enough. I completely acknowledge this and I'm aware of it. So, I mean, I was listening to the previous podcast because I wanted to pull out some quotes for, again, social media. And guys, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. But it has to be done. It has to be done. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to fill you in on or mention. There is a bit of an echo at the beginning of the podcast. It was just some tech stuff, but it does get better, I promise. And it doesn't go for very long. I think it's only a couple minutes. So, yeah. I think that's it. Oh, Sumayya, at the end, I invite people to ask for prayers for certain people. And she says hers. I'd also just like to add that there's a boy, Miqdad, who was hit by a truck. And he was on his bicycle. So he is in he's in a severe and critical condition right now. So if we could all put our thoughts and prayers for him, that would be amazing. And I think that's actually it. I hope that this podcast is one that you enjoy and can learn from. And again, like I mentioned, if anyone, you feel anyone could be benefited by it, then please feel free to share it. That would be great. I want this one specifically to reach as many people as possible and join the discussion. So I hope you have a good one and I hope you have a good rest of the week. Kalafis. Alaykum, everyone, and welcome to The Rogue Muslim. Thanks for joining us for another episode. Today I am joined by Sumayya. And Sumayya, okay, Sumayya is we were discussing, like, should we include this in the podcast or not? Also, by the way, it's taken like an hour to get composed. Because that's just what happens.
We'll probably end up laughing at some point.
Yeah. This could either be super helpful or I don't upload it. I'm kidding. I'll upload it. So yeah, Sumayya is, as brown families go, like she's technically my aunt, even though she's younger than me.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this is the thing. You can find wisdom at any age and mentorship and guidance. So don't just, bottle your lives into people and seek guidance from people that are older than you. Now, Sumayya is doing her master's in mental health studies. Did I get that right? Okay. Because I was going to add some like flowery jargon and she was like, no, it's just mental health.
Just mental health studies.
Yeah. Let's keep it simple, people.
Indeed.
So, to start this off, also, guys, I'm going to start like doing icebreakers on my podcast. And the question that I'm going to ask people is, what would your last meal on earth be? I'm intrigued.
Okay, so my last meal on earth would be A, penne arrabbiata.
What?
Penne arrabbiata. Please, Italians, don't butcher me. Right?
I'm sure I have many, many listeners in Italy.
Sure.
I know.
So that's what it'd be. And then for dessert, it would be Haagen-Dazs, cookies and cream, and just the whole pint, really. ice cream.
I mean, it's your last day. You might as well.
Yeah, exactly.
YOLO, literally.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be my last meal.
What about to drink?
You know what? Probably just water.
Sumayya, no chai?
Because, no chai. I mean, it depends. If it's cold, then yeah.
What?
If it's like cold outside, like if the weather.
Oh, I thought you meant like cold chai, like tea. What?
No.
Oh, I was gonna say you're very blasphemous cordial.
Cold tea.
Oh my god. Okay.
Oh wait, iced tea.
Iced tea is good. I just
No.
I just came into that world. It's very nice.
No.
Okay. I approve. I will challenge you on the ice cream, though. It should be Baskin Robbins mint chocolate chip, but this won't affect our relationship for now.
Okay.
So we are discussing mental health today. I'd put out on Facebook and Twitter that I want to start talking about mental health and do a podcast on it. But I think it's going to be something that is going to be a series on this, and it's just going to be a discussion and conversations that I'm going to be having throughout this podcast journey, just because I think it's something that's not really talked about, and definitely the comment section made that clear, that it's something that still has so much stigma associated with it that we don't talk about within Muslim communities, and there's just not a lot of safe spaces to talk about it, because we talk about things that we are happy about. We're happy to disclose those things. If somebody is getting married, or they've graduated, or general just good stuff that happens in life, and we trust people to share our joy. But I think there's sometimes a lack of trust in terms of we don't trust people to share our pain with us and to be there for us. So hopefully that's something that we can work collectively towards and have discussions in to curate a community and a culture that does allow for this, these disclosures and this compassion, empathy, and general humanity to thrive within. So as my first guest for this kind of topic, I've got Sumayya on, and we're just going to work through the basics of mental health today, and then I think we're going to do a part 2, right?
Yeah.
On what mental health is like within Islam. So,
Okay.
Sumayya, can you tell us a little bit about what is mental health?
So, first of all, we need to clarify this distinction between mental health and mental illness. So mental health is something that we all have. We all experience emotions, thoughts, and feelings. But our mental health, basically what it refers to is our psychological and emotional well-being. Now, mental health comes in when this well-being is altered in some extreme way. So something changes within us that then alters our thoughts and our behavior. So when we talk about mental health, we have to be clear that it's something that everyone does have. But mental illness generally refers to a condition or some sort of change that negatively affects us. Now, you can distinguish between positive and negative mental health. So with positive mental health, we can talk about factors that allow us to maintain positive emotions in life, like happiness, enthusiasm, hope, etc. So, for example, there's a massive amount of research to show that social support, so your family, your friends, any other kind of social network, is a key factor in your emotional well-being. Now, with negative mental health, it's more about factors that put us at risk for developing a mental illness, or just kind of any changes in our psychological well-being. So if we use the same example, not having a strong support network can actually put you at risk of experiencing lower levels of kind of emotional and psychological well-being in comparison to someone who has a more stable and secure social network.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's not something that is stagnant, like our mental health, right? Like, so it can go ebb and flow, yeah?
Very, very much so.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But so now I'm listening to what you're saying and talking about having a strong support network. What does that look like? And in terms of, people aren't always able to get out of the networks that they're a part of. So how does that impact one's mental health or mental? Yeah. mental health?
Yeah, so with obviously with a social network, we're talking about family, friends. We're talking about generally the people that you surround yourself with. If we're thinking about this from a practical point of view, you have healthcare professionals such as doctors. If you're in school, then you have school nurses and counselors, or kind of more like psychologists and psychiatrists and people like that. That's if we're thinking about it. If you're struggling with something and you need someone to talk to, then they're the professionals that are there. But of course, when you're talking about social support from your friends and family, that tends to be where most people start. And that's where most people's emotional well-being, happiness, enthusiasm, you want to go out with your friends, you want to have fun with your family, and, take days out and just generally feel in a secure unit. Now, it's a bit more complicated because sometimes I'm pretty sure every person has experienced this, but you have a friend or a family member and you have an experience with them that may affect your trust in them, whether that's positively or negatively. And I think it's important to know the people that you surround yourself with. So you need to be the best judge of your own support system. There are going to be people within your circle of friends or your family unit or your community as a whole who you won't be able to trust, and you'll know that you can't trust them. And I think the most important thing is to remove yourself from those relationships. And it's hard when it's, say, for example, a community member that you see every week. It's hard to kind of remove yourself from that situation. But if we're talking, if you want what's best for you emotionally, psychologically, you need to surround yourself by people who you know you can trust and who you know will listen to you. So, your support network, yeah, whether that's professionals, it can be friends, family, but also it can be kind of people that you would least expect it to be, like your favorite teacher or professor, a mentor that you have, kind of just someone who is there in your life that you feel comfortable around. And I think that's the best way to judge who's good to keep around in your life, is when you're comfortable around them.
Yeah.
So,
For sure. And this, I don't know if it will directly relate, but in terms of like outsiders, I guess, gaining trust of people or showing that they're there for a person, it just makes me think, like, in Islam, we have this narration that even a smile is charity. You know what I mean? Yeah. So even if, you just indicate with a warm smile that you like genuinely care for somebody, that in itself, those, also, guys, I'm getting sick, so my brain is completely fogged up. I think I need like a 3-year-old to come on the pod and teach me the alphabet right now at this point. But it's like those non-verbal communication.
yeah,
That's what it is, right? So that, I suppose, could also be an indicator of how you can trust somebody or to demonstrate that you're there for a person.
Body language is one of the most important things. You can just tell, even smiling, like facial expressions, but also just how someone is sitting. Are they sitting close to you? Are they kind of leaning away from you? How comfortable are they with physical contact? How close can you be with each other and feel comfortable? It's just so many things that all kind of add up. I think it's one of those things when you, if you're struggling with something and you've decided that you're going to speak to someone, the best way you can do that is by following your instincts, which sounds kind of wishy-washy, but in all honesty, you'll know from whether that's from prior experience or just from how they are in the moment, if they're kind of really open to listening to you, if they're smiling at you, if they're being warm generally, if they're warm to be around, you'll kind of know that you can speak to them and you can trust them.
Yeah. And in terms of because I am like interested in this dynamic between, for example, like so-called insiders and outsiders, although there is a spectrum, and again, mental health ebbs and flows, so you could be in the inside at one point and you could be on the outside at one point. But as an outsider, how does one are there certain cues, are there certain things that people can say that because I think the first thing we tend to do is just want to give advice or say, suck it up, buttercup, or, there's plenty of other things going on in this world. So, what do you have to have a mental illness about? You have food on the table, you've got a shelter, etc. So, are there ways, that people can, or are there things that people should stop doing, I guess?
Well, in terms of to stop doing, well, I don't think anyone. I mean, it's not something that's particularly common, especially if someone you care about has come to you with something. You're unlikely to judge them. But I would always say that's number one, is to make sure you don't judge them. I think one of the other big things is to be patient, because when someone opens up to you, not only does it take time, but it's also really important to treat the information that they're sharing with a lot of respect, because for someone to share their thoughts and feelings, their kind of struggles that they're facing, is not an easy thing to do. And it takes a lot. So and you know what, especially if something like shame is a factor that's involved, if someone's ashamed of how they're feeling, it's really important to be patient and to respect what they're saying. And just treat it with respect. And, it's unlikely that if someone comes to you with something, you're going to necessarily 100% understand what they're saying and understand what they're feeling. But the biggest thing you can do is just be there for support. Just be someone that they can rely on, be consistent, listen to them. Don't treat them differently just because they're experiencing some issues. Give them a sense of normality. If you're going out with a group of friends, invite them. Don't exclude them. But if they can't come out, don't make them feel bad. Kind of be there to help them feel like they're still normal, they're still a part of your life, but you understand that they might need some added support and they might not be able to be as sociable as you want them to be.
Right.
So the most important thing to make someone feel like is to make them feel cared for and supported. And generally, however you can do that, whether it's through a big gesture or a small gesture, it's going to mean something to that person.
Yeah.
I think that's the best thing you can really do.
For sure. Like they're already spending so much time working on themselves, and you want them to spend their energies working on themselves, like surviving, healing, and then like thriving in this world. So I was doing some reading and, to try and prepare for the podcast and just familiarize myself with some of the conversations that are happening, and especially in terms of Islam and mental health, which also I found that quite a lot of the articles, they'll like talk about their journey, which is fair, and I think that's great. But at the end, it will just be like, and Islam helped me. And I think people need to hold on to their religion a bit more. It can really be a tool of strength. And then that was it. And so I think that's something that we could talk about in part 2 of here, as to how exactly Islam can be a tool, and the complexities around those conversations. But in reading, I came across a really fantastic article that I'm going to link in the show notes for the podcast. I think it's one of the best and the most accessible ones that I've read. And, they were saying how it just took one person to say, I'm in your boat. Whatever's happening in your boat, I'm in there. It doesn't matter if you're happy. It doesn't matter if you're going down. I'm going to be there with you. Or even just, so just saying that, and then leave it. If somebody, I think you're right. Just constantly try and reach out to people, but also allow them to, react as they need to react, right? Yeah. And another one of the things I was reading was how somebody was going through severe depression, and they couldn't feel anything. So when you're saying things like, "Oh, why don't you go out? It's such a beautiful day," they don't see that. They don't have the feelings right now to see that, and so it makes them feel even more horrible inside when you tell them things like this. And it's like, well, I can't feel it. So what's, there's just more internal shaming going on, and external shaming. But one of the things I came across was how a man knew his friend was going through depression, so he would come and he would just massage his feet for an hour. They wouldn't even necessarily talk, but he would just massage his feet because that was the only part of him that felt some human connection with somebody else or some feeling. So there are so many unique ways that we can try and navigate our mental health and our responses to mental illness, but don't give up. Right?
Yeah,
I think that's what that's what you're getting at. So we've talked about this slightly so far, but there is a lot of stigma associated with mental illness. And so I understand that there's a myriad of reasons as to what the stigma could be rooted in, etc. But could you just discuss a bit more about the stigma, and has it always been there, or is it something that we're seeing a lot more now?
Yeah, definitely. I think, to be honest, one of the biggest causes of stigma surrounding mental health is this whole perception that those with mental illnesses are dangerous. And to be honest, here it's just about education. The media has a role to play in this, and we can't deny that. If you look at kind of movies or TV shows that attempt to present mental illnesses as a storyline, often you'll find it's not done particularly well. And it tends to present people with mental illnesses, varying mental illnesses, schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder, kind of various issues, they present these people as dangerous. In reality, the vast majority of people with mental illnesses are not dangerous, no more than the average person is, no more than you and I are. So for those with kind of more severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia...
Well, some we're Muslims, so we are kind of dangerous, right?
Yeah,
that's a thing.
I mean,
all Muslims are dangerous and to be feared, right?
Exactly.
You didn't get. Yeah, we all got the memo when we were born, right?
And when you find a shooter who decides to shoot 45 people, they're mentally ill.
Yeah, those poor white folks, man.
Honestly.
No, sorry, man. I had to interject.
No, I mean, you know what? It's just one of those things. The media has a massive role to play in so many different things. Even just you bringing that up, something like referring to these terrorists, because that's what they are. These terrorists, these people like the shooter in Vegas, referring to them as mentally ill is very, very problematic, more so than a lot of people understand, because you're basically trying to say that someone who would do that has a reason, and they're doing it because they're mentally ill. So what about the rest of the population who do experience mental illnesses? Are we all gonna kind of go out and shoot? Obviously not. So the media is it can be quite dangerous, but I mean, if you kind of do want to think about aggression and danger when it comes to mental illness, for people with kind of more severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia, some of the aggressive patients are actually more likely to be a danger to themselves as opposed to a danger to others.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this whole stigma, it's always been there with mental health. I mean, if you think about the sort of early 1900s, people were placed in asylums for literally showing symptoms that the majority of us kind of show daily. We get stressed, we get anxious, we get irritable, just kind of common symptoms that we all experience. People used to be put in asylums for that. And these asylums were not good places. They were crowded, inhumane. No one really saw you as an individual. You would kind of be placed on medication and just kept sedated all day. The treatments that they used would include electroconvulsive therapy, where basically they attach nodes to you and they send an electric shock through you to induce a seizure. And it's actually been shown to reduce depressive symptoms, but no one knows how. And this was used most commonly in those sorts of times. Even lobotomy, where they literally sever an area of your brain to get rid of symptoms. And it used to be very inhumane even. And these kind of earlier beliefs from the early 1900s, are likely to kind of shape how mental health is perceived today. And to be honest, a lot of it does come culturally. Even in those times, exorcisms, demon possessions. I think we'll touch on that.
We're going to talk about jinns and
exactly.
and mental health.
But even that always used to kind of be there That's how a lot of people used to perceive mental illnesses. But this is all kind of social stigma. A lot of the stigma associated with mental health is self-stigma. And that's basically when you judge yourself and you have a judgment and perception of yourself, and you're kind of telling yourself that you shouldn't be experiencing these symptoms. Like you were saying earlier, there's a common attitude of you have no reason to be unhappy. You have food on the table, you have a shelf, you have a roof over your head. You know, why do you have depression? Or why are you so unhappy? And that kind of, that has a tendency to make the whole situation worse. And sometimes it's not someone else telling you that, it's you telling yourself that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even more dangerous, in all honesty. It's not all doom and gloom. You've probably noticed that mental health is being taken a lot more seriously. It's being discussed more. So I guess there's a positive, but the stigma has definitely, there's various reasons, but, the media doesn't always help.
Yeah. Yeah. So two things tied to that. First of all, have you seen American Horror Story Asylum?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. What did you think of the way they carried that out?
American Horror Story in general is not the kind of thing that I think people who watch will take things like that away from. Right. So, for example, if you're watching Murder House, then you're not going to kind of think that a lot of that is kind of real. So the same way, if you're watching Asylum, you're unlikely to kind of be like, okay, yeah, this is exactly how it is. But to be honest, it made a pretty accurate depiction of what asylums used to be like.
That's what I thought. And when you were talking about how they would be taken away just because of depicting stress, anxiety, or irritability or something like that, I felt like they kind of depicted that part.
Yeah, they did, definitely. So, it's not all terrible. Even, have you seen Girl Interrupted?
No, I've never even heard of that.
Oh, okay. But there is the occasional kind of movie or TV show that, doesn't do a terrible job, but at the same time, it doesn't help, mm-hmm. if you're not kind of normalizing it. Yeah. It's just seen as something that's so unusual and something that's so eccentric.
Yeah.
And it's not,
Mm-hmm. And maybe this is also something we could discuss later on. I think we're going to talk a bit about social media today, but either we could discuss it today or in the next episode. But how, when, what's that? 13 Reasons Why came out. Yeah, there's a lot of controversy and conversation. So maybe that's something that if I could just get your thoughts on it. Obviously, it's just one person's thought here, but maybe that's something in the future we could have a discussion about as well in terms of the media and what the effects are on people that do have a mental illness right now and at whatever part of the spectrum they're at.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Also, right now, okay, so there's this there's a conversation going on where are people just saying they're depressed and they're anxious because it's like the cool thing to say, right? So how do you respond to people that have this kind of an attitude? Because it can take away, it does take away from the seriousness of mental illness, such as depression and anxiety. So what are your thoughts on that?
In mental health research, this is an issue. If you think about it, on one hand, it's actually great that mental health is being normalized to an extent because, people who are experiencing depression and anxiety, for people who say everyone has it, it kind of makes it less isolating. The issue kind of really arises when young people kind of see it as something that's cool or, quote, hipster, unquote. Because, that's not the case. The majority of cases in which you see this happening is amongst teenagers. And I don't mean to kind of be stereotypical, but adolescence does give rise to kind of many issues and many situations. And I guess it makes sense when you think about teenagers. At that time, you want nothing more than to be accepted by your peers. And it can be an issue when certain young people start to feel excluded because they're not experiencing such terrible conditions. And it can be a big problem. I sadly don't have the answers. There's a lot of research being done into how we can tackle this kind of almost trend behind mental illness. But I like to think of it more as something which is opening doors for conversation. And I mean, in this society, it's, talking is definitely not a bad thing.
Yeah, something we need more of because we're increasingly less connected. And I think there's that's something that I want to touch on eventually, but how capitalism can impact your mental health because of feelings of loneliness and isolation. Yeah. But that's a huge topic that I need to do a lot of research about. But in connection to that, because there's this idea of, wanting to be accepted by your peers, but, there's also this idea of comparing your mental illness, right? Like, my mental illness is worse than yours. So, oh, you don't display these symptoms, or how come you didn't actually have a panic attack and stuff, right? So, and this idea even that there is a correct way to perform mental illness, right? And to visibly see mental illness. So how, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, my mental illness is worse than yours, or even the idea that it doesn't look the same for everyone?
So this is, again, a big issue. You find a lot of competition, again, quite specifically amongst teenagers. For example, you say you have anxiety, but I've never seen you have a panic attack when I have them all the time. Or you don't really have depression if you don't self-harm, and that's kind of an issue all in itself. Or you can't have an eating disorder because you don't weigh 80 pounds. It's like a community of who can be more ill. And it's honestly very dangerous when people decide that they want to be the most ill. And I think the biggest way you can tackle these discussions is by understanding that mental health is experienced in...
Sorry, guys, we had some technical difficulties, like the bane of my bloody existence. But you were talking about just understanding that people experience mental health struggles in various ways.
So you may have heard the saying that the happiest looking people are actually the most sad. What comes across physically is not necessarily, if ever, the case. And again, it's about education. We have to teach people that their perceptions of mental health are probably nothing like what mental health actually is. For example, there's the age-old, you have to be on your deathbed to be taken seriously about an eating disorder. For something like anorexia nervosa, yes, low weight is the most defining factor. But some people have bulimia, which is an eating disorder in which people eat large and large amounts of food and then make themselves sick. Or binge eating disorder, where people literally just eat large and large amounts of food and they can't control it. And these people are most commonly either at a normal looking weight or even overweight, but are just as physically and psychologically unwell as someone with anorexia nervosa. So that's why sometimes people are so shocked when they hear someone going into cardiac arrest and it turns out that they had bulimia, because they don't look underweight. So how is it that they have an eating disorder?
Yeah.
Really, with the whole issue of this whole competitive element to mental illnesses, it's nothing to do with, this is how sad you look and this is how sad I look. Therefore, I have depression and you don't. It's everyone experiences it in different ways, and I think it's just a matter of education. You just need to be able to educate people into knowing that mental health is just so vast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was something going around on Facebook of people posting pictures of their loved ones right before they committed suicide to show that mental illness doesn't have a face, right? It doesn't have a way that you have to present. Like you said, it's not like you have to be 80 pounds in order to have a eating disorder, or you're not depressed unless you self-harm. So it was showing that, this family went kayaking the day before, canoeing the day before, and the family member is smiling in the picture. But then a couple of days later, they took their life. So we really need to start having these conversations and seeing that mental illness doesn't have a prototype. There's no prototypical way of being mentally ill, and we need to meet people where they are and just say, I believe. It's kind of like, with sexual violence, right? When somebody comes out and says that they were violated, typically the thing is like, oh no, why did they come out after so long? Like with all this Harvey Weinstein stuff, the conversation is like, why did they wait all this time to come out? Like, oh, if I was in their positions, I would have just said something, blah, blah, blah. But you don't know what the repercussions are of coming out. So just, and the only way to meet, to the healthy, or the approach should be that, you know what, I believe you. And if something happens that, it didn't exactly transpire as was narrated, then that will come out. But your first point should be that I believe you. Yeah. And I feel like that's the approach as well with mental illness. It's like if somebody, it takes so much for somebody to come and say, I'm just not feeling well. I'm not feeling right. And you just say, I believe you, instead of brushing it under the rug or trying to, see what kind of symptoms they're displaying and then having a checklist and marking it off kind of thing. Yeah. So that is definitely something that we need to be having a conversation about, and we'll pursue that kind of a conversation in future episodes as well. But again, this is kind of a basic introduction to mental illness and mental health. So to keep it going, there's often a debate between using mainstream resources and help, such as drugs, or using more natural things like naturopathy or certain like cupping methods, etc. And religion as well, I think, would fall into the more naturopathic way. And so sometimes there seems like there's an elitism on both sides. Is that the case? And what are the conversations around this debate between mainstream healing versus naturopathic healing?
So whenever a question like this comes up, my go-to answer is almost always a mix of both. And it sounds like a complete cop-out, but honestly, I think that the whole idea of treatment really stems from the actual causes of most mental illnesses. So there's the whole kind of nature-nurture debate. A lot of people say that it's all about biology, while others say it's all about kind of your environment. But honestly, for the most part, it does tend to be both. So factors such as your genes, your brain structure, and kind of any sort of alterations in your brain structure, hormones, things like that, they all kind of tend to combine with environmental factors like your socioeconomic status, your kind of parental environment, any past experiences of trauma, and these things kind of combine together to result in symptoms of a mental illness. It makes sense to treat treatments the same way. So, I mean, the mainstream drug industry, if we think about it, they do have their own agenda, there's no doubt. But at the same time, antidepressants like SSRIs, they basically, what they do is they increase levels of serotonin in the brain. I won't get into the boring biology of it, but serotonin is basically a hormone, and it's very low in people who suffer from depression. And these antidepressants like SSRIs, they can be very, very effective. Now, what most research has shown is that these drugs are most effective when it's combined with talking therapies. So you'll have cognitive behavioral therapy, which is all focused about changing your kind of negative thoughts, your negative thought processes, or you have psychotherapy, which is more focused on tackling the kind of causes of your illnesses, so past trauma. And there's various other talking therapies. And this isn't just for depression, which is the most common. You've got it for anxiety, for eating disorders, kind of all sorts, almost everything, really. You can use this combination. And it's about each individual. If we're thinking about symptoms which are sort of more mild to moderate, as opposed to like severe symptoms, self-help can be incredibly effective. And I mean, in certain countries where healthcare isn't readily available, and you're kind of placed, even in countries where it is, but you're placed on a waiting list for a ridiculous amount of time to get the right treatment, you kind of don't really have a choice but to attempt sort of self-help techniques. So things like getting enough sleep, eating regularly, even if you don't particularly have an appetite, exercise, which literally releases endorphins, which make you feel happier. And like you said, religion is a kind of natural treatment. And, this is great. You can do all of these things to help yourself. It's just that the way that it will work, self-help can only do so much, because you're not getting the kind of support that you may be needing. And therefore, kind of more natural treatments and self-help, they work best when you're kind of using them alongside professional support. And really, whether that's if you don't like the idea of going on medication, tell your doctor that. They hear it all the time. You don't have to go on medication. There are so many alternatives, but it's hard to, if you are experiencing kind of symptoms that you can't help yourself to get out of. It's fine, and it's common, and it's really okay to kind of explore other options. It's not just about kind of sticking with all the things that things like religion. Just use religion to sort yourself out is something that you commonly hear, and it doesn't quite work like that. So it's always important to have kind of a balance between the two of them.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And so using it's all personalized, right? Like, it has to be personalized, because there is no checklist, there's no right way of performing your mental health or going on your journey of mental health. But there's so much shame as well associated in talking about it and then seeking help. So how do we begin to counter the shame associated with seeking out help, or and whatever help looks like for the individual?
So, I mean, honestly, the best way to do this is just think about the statistics. At the moment, 1 in 4 people in the world will be affected by mental illness at some point in their life. Mm-hmm. And currently, around 450 million people suffer from a mental illness. So that's a huge statistic. If you are kind of suffering, you're not alone, and it's not something that you need to be ashamed of. We all, this is going back to the start when we looked at the distinction between mental health and mental illness. We all have mental health. It shouldn't be such a big stigma to say that we all have mental health. The fact is that some of us just experience it differently, and there doesn't have to be a pinpoint event in your life that has caused it. There doesn't have to be some big traumatic experience. Sometimes these things just happen. Sometimes some people, maybe it's biology, maybe it's not. Sometimes mental illness happens, and there's nothing wrong with feeling your emotions and not hiding them away, or struggling with feelings and thoughts that other people may not understand. It's okay to talk. Like, you don't have to suffer alone. If we look at someone who has diabetes and they take insulin, just the same way, you might need to take medication for your depression or your anxiety. If you look at someone who has cancer, you don't blame them. You don't tell them that it's their fault. You don't shame them because they have to have treatment. Mental illness is no different. You can't see it. Yeah, you can't. Fair enough. That's how it's different. But it doesn't mean that it's not there, and it doesn't mean that you have to consider it as something that is kind of not real, because it is. It's very real. And you know what? You can just look at the statistics. You can look at kind of the rates of suicide and the rates of things like that. And if that's not real, I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And it also shouldn't be gendered. And that's a huge topic and something that we should be having a conversation about in the future. But it whatever your gender identity, there shouldn't be shame in speaking out. There shouldn't be shame in feeling these very natural emotions. I mean, especially in the brown community, there's a lot of stigma for men showing, well, you know what, in most communities, there's a lot of stigma for men showing their emotions, for crying, for saying, you know what, I'm not right. I'm not feeling right. I don't feel well at all. And if we want to progress this ummah, we need to start getting rid of the bullshit that's like that. That's out there like that, frankly. But yeah, that is a big discussion to have, and something that I think both of us could talk about it, but in the interest of time, we should, move on a bit. Sum and I like to talk about this stuff a lot.
Yeah,
so, yeah. One of the things that concern me as well. And again, like all of these topics that we're discussing, they all have so many, they're so complex in and of themselves. There's so much to unpack there, but generally speaking, we're discussing them today. And one of the things I wanted to discuss was the effect of social media and mental illness. So we've talked about the role of TV shows or film and the positive and or negative impacts they have. And again, we're going to unpack that further in the future. But also, you know, nowadays, if kids are being bullied at school and that affects their mental health and leads to a mental illness, you know, before, to an extent, you could go home and you could escape it for a bit. There was a bit of a sanctuary, albeit, you know, you're also thinking about it in your head. But at this point now, there's so much social media. You're going to be bullied left, right, and center on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, etc., on Snapchat. You know what? What do we do? What can we do? How can we utilize? Because it's not going anywhere. So how can we utilize social media as a positive tool in engaging conversations about mental health? And also, what are the boundaries of social media when you're, especially when you're growing up, you're in your teenage years, when you're most vulnerable and susceptible to these sort of attitudes and bullying?
Yeah, no, you're completely right. Social media, I mean, it's everywhere, isn't it? It is common to focus on negatives because there are a lot. I mean, just like you were saying, cyberbullying is so common now. And arguably, it's easier to actually bully someone behind a screen because you feel less accounted for it, less responsible for it. But it also, if there's no accountability, there's no one, you can't see who it is to blame. And that can sometimes just maintain a mental illness or, you know, depression or anything like that because you're not getting any sort of closure for it. And not just bullying, but you get triggers everywhere. Are you familiar with Tumblr?
Only through my sister in her youth. I don't know too much about it. It was a bit weird. Yeah.
But Tumblr is basically it's like a blog, and you can be just scrolling through it. That you see, so it's mainly pictures and kind of quotes and things like that. You can just be scrolling through it, and suddenly an image will come up, and you know, it could be ranging from, you know, someone cutting themselves or just the blade or, you know, just some sort of image can come up and it will trigger you so quickly. Think about pro-anorexia websites where...
Wait, what?
Pro-anorexia websites, are you familiar?
No.
Okay, so pro-anorexia websites are basically a group of people suffering from anorexia nervosa or other eating disorders, and they kind of gather together on a website, on a forum, and they basically encourage each other to continue to lose weight and to continue to drastically restrict their calorie intake, to exercise, to fast, all of these sorts of things.
So is that like a masked way of trying to it's not healing, but to face what they're going through and to kind of say like affirm their actions?
Yeah, it's almost as if they're telling each other that it's okay to do what they're doing.
Right.
So it's a massive platform. Honestly, I'm a bit surprised you haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
But it's no, obviously no offense, but
no, I mean that's the thing, right? We're all learning here. We're all going to be exposed to things that are going to be a bit hard, but and also we need to know the depth of how important this this is.
These websites, these pro-anorexia websites, they're so easily accessible. Kind of, if you literally just type in pro-anorexia into Google, you'll come up with thousands and thousands of web pages, and you literally 2 clicks away. And as a kind of 13, 14-year-old, when you're quite easily influenced and, you know, someone can make quite a big impression on you, if you end up on one of those sites where, look, someone's saying, oh, it's okay, you don't need to eat today, or you know, go and exercise just for thinking about eating, and just kind of really intense things like that. And it's honestly, it's startling how much there is, and how triggering things can be. But you know what, like you were saying, it's important to also focus on the kind of ways you can utilize social media, because as you said, it's not going anywhere. And personally, I'm a huge advocate of positive psychology, which is all about kind of focusing on people's strengths as opposed to their weaknesses. And And I think it works the same with something like social media. Pro-Anorexia does exist, but so does anorexia recovery websites, where you also have a group of people who have suffered from anorexia and currently in recovery, and they support each other through their recovery. And, there are so many people who struggle with different mental illnesses, not just eating disorders, but, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, all sorts. And they come together on social media, and it gives them a platform to talk and to discuss the struggles that they're facing. And it gives them a sense of having people to talk to who actually do understand, because they've been through it too. And it makes them feel less alone, less isolated. And there's so much support that can be accessed through social media groups and forums. Sometimes it's hard to talk to people in person. And, that's why there are things coming out like computerized cognitive behavioral therapy, where you can do a course of therapy on your computer rather than kind of face to face. So there's so many ways we can utilize it. It's just about being able to set boundaries. And it's a hard thing to do, because every teenager these days has easy access to the internet. And it's a hard thing to tackle, because, how can you can't take it away from them, because it's literally their world. And it's just about kind of putting out there all the support networks that are there, and educating people on the kind of more positive sites and the more positive things we can be doing on social media. Even if it's just something like posting Facebook statuses or Twitter tweets about mental health and raising awareness and having more conversations about it. There's so much that we can do. So instead of focusing on the negatives, we can attempt to utilize it in the way that it deserves to be utilized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's so much space for it, and sorry, I don't have much to add, because I'm thinking about something else with what you said. But no, I 100% agree that it is. And it's something that will affect our mental health as witnesses to social media as well. That if we're seeing more of this positive psychology, or seeing people's strengths, seeing people support each other, seeing people lift each other up, and just saying I'm here for you, again, in a world that's increasingly more isolated, ironically because of social media, but it's not, we've said it's not going away, so we need to be utilizing it to the best of our abilities. I've also had a deja vu of this moment, so it's kind of weirding me out. But you talked about, there's triggers everywhere. So what are some of the ways that people can support themselves in terms of not getting triggered by it, because that's not something that you can necessarily control, but maybe not being as affected by it? Does that make sense?
No, it does.
Okay.
I think if you think about it, again, practically, block them. If you see someone who's open to posting sorts of things that you don't want to look at, or are going to be triggering, just straight away block them. On some platforms you can report them if it's something that is very inappropriate. Unfortunately, there's not much you can do. If someone sends you a Snapchat, for example, I don't know how common this is, but if someone sends you a Snapchat of something that's particularly triggering to you, and you open it, you know what Snapchat's like. You don't see it beforehand, so you're going to open it, and suddenly you'll be triggered just as quickly as that, and it's difficult. It's important to identify your triggers and then try to distance yourself from them as much as possible. But I think the responsibility really lies on, people like us, as well as people who are posting these things. Because when you talk about mental illnesses, even just for us saying the words self-harm, or saying the words depression or eating disorder or 80 pounds even, those words can literally trigger someone. And I think it's the responsibility of many people on social media platforms to put trigger warnings before anything that can be considered a trigger. If that's this podcast, I think this should have a trigger warning. I think people on YouTube who are posting videos about their own experiences with mental health, I think they should have a trigger warning. I think it's our responsibility as people who are talking and trying to facilitate discussion about mental illness, it's our responsibility to minimize these triggers for these people, because they are vulnerable, and we need to be wary of that.
What are the responses to people that say, oh, I mean, people are triggered just by breathing these days, kind of thing? Or, where it's like trigger can be is a sort of buzzword right now. Not to say that the impact of triggering is a buzzword or a trend, right? But just the word itself. So what are the responses for those people that say, you know what, like, people are triggered by everything, you just need to, like, suck it up again, or man up or woman up or whatever, and just deal with it?
Look, there are loads of things that are happening in the world right now that we don't have control over. And yeah, maybe people do get triggered by very little things, but should it not be something that we should try to minimize?
And
we're not saying don't kind of post anything anywhere. We're just saying be careful. Even if it's post it, just put a trigger warning beside it, so people know that people who are, in particular people who are in recovery, because that's hard when you're in recovery and you see a trigger and suddenly it's like all of your recovery has just gone to pot, and that's not easy. So consider other people. Really, that's the only thing I can say, because and that's the thing, like, it is a buzzword at the moment. You kind of see various pictures on Twitter with the sort of statement "triggered" about something that's literally not triggering in the slightest. But that's just the way social media works, and it will change and it will develop over time. It's just as people who are trying to make this better, it's our responsibility to kind of keep it as clean as we can, really.
Right. And it's not like it's not like out with the old, in with the new. It's kind of, we're working towards healing humanity, right? Like, it's
exactly.
where just compassion doesn't hurt anyone. In fact,
No.
I mean, there's a lack of compassion in the world, and that's what bloody hurts everyone. But you never know the effect that you can have just by doing these small things within your habits and making them your habits. Smiling at people, putting trigger warnings, being a bit more conscious about the way you're reacting to things. So there's so many nuances within the conversation of mental illness and mental health that we need to open our eyes to and be aware of. And that, the responses look different for any different ages, different genders, different socioeconomic circumstances, geographical location, etc.
Yeah.
But at least having a conversation about it is one step towards working towards it and dealing with it.
Definitely.
And so, like we've mentioned quite a few times throughout the podcast, we're going to be doing a part 2 of this, which is going to focus more heavily on Islam and mental health. But just as a final thing, what are some of the things that what are some of the things that Islam does say about mental health, or what can Muslims do for those that do want to access help and resources and seek this guidance?
Yeah, so, I mean, Islam says a lot of things about mental health. I don't think if I got into it now, I wouldn't stop. But definitely we can talk more specifically. I guess just as a final point, the main thing that I can suggest specifically for any Muslims who are struggling with anything is Muslim Youth Helpline.
And
this
is
I'm sure
UK?
kind of.
Yeah, we've got definitely things here in Canada, and I'm sure they exist in other countries.
I mean, other helplines as well. I mean, you've got the Samaritans, for example, which runs 24 hours, but Muslim Youth Helpline has kind of been developed for the very reason, and it's been dedicated to helping Muslims, young or old, going through kind of any difficulties in their life, and this can from kind of relationships to mental illnesses. And you can access it from anywhere in the world.
Oh, really?
It's not just it's not just UK.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Maybe calling, I'll have to find out, but I'm not entirely sure about calling. But I mean, you can email Muslim Youth Helpline, you can instant message with them at certain times as well.
Yeah, can you tell me the contact?
Go.
Sorry, I think it's cutting off a bit. Are you able to send me the contact?
I can say it now,
okay.
and then I can send it to you as well.
Perfect.
Basically, Muslim Youth Helpline are open Monday to Friday from 6 p.m. to 12 a.m.
And this is where? This is just like they don't have an office or anything, or do they?
They have an office, but it's a phone number that I'll give you.
Okay.
And then Saturday and Sunday from 12 p.m. to 12 a.m.
Okay.
So their phone number is 0808 808 2008. So if you want to write that down, feel free to rewind this. And is that how podcasts work?
Yeah. Can you just send me that number and I'll put it in the show notes? I'll write it down.
Sure. I'll send you the email address as well.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks.
And you can not only call them, but you can also go onto their website and you can instant chat. Volunteers are basically trained listeners. And I was a volunteer for 3 years. So I know pretty well how much it helps, how much it base as well. A lot of people used to call us up and you know what we're just trying to listen to explore kind of questions. There's no criteria for who can call up. You can call up whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, whether you're Muslim, whether you're not, doesn't matter. Again, confidentiality is assumed, so a risk to kind of yourself or others. Generally kind of gives you a safe space to just speak to worry and take, you know, that first step to reach out and to someone. Honestly, really, really good service. We get all sorts of calls and messages and emails, and it just kind of gives you a Muslim-specific, a culture-specific space to get your worries across. And there are other options. Obviously, you've got, like I said, the Samaritans. Even like, you know, going to your local doctor or you're having a chat with them, because they're more likely to kind of be able to signpost you and refer you to someone who kind of be the professional support that you need. And it's not always to kind of family or your community, because there's a fear of judgment and shame, which is where Muslim Youth can be a really good kind of organisation. But honestly, I would always suggest that if there is someone that you feel comfortable talking with in your life, to them, because nothing beats face to face.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, I will. I think it was cutting off a bit, so I will summarize this again in the introduction for the podcast. But what someone's basically saying is that there are resources out there and there is nothing to be ashamed of for seeking help. The Muslim Youth Helpline, they have trained volunteers and it's a judgment-free zone. You can literally go to them about anything. Sumayya worked with the Muslim Youth Helpline, and that's something that if you're comfortable with, we can talk about next time. Just to show people that, you know, there's a myriad of different reasons that people would connect with the Muslim Youth Helpline, and there's nothing too big or nothing too small that you can come to them with. And again, she's mentioned the number, and I will leave the number in the show notes. I think it's an excellent tool. I've heard some of the conversations, we've had conversations about it. Don't worry, she hasn't disclosed anything to me. I'm just generally speaking. We've had conversations about it, and I've been involved in some of the conversations locally here in Canada. So I do think that they are an excellent resource and an excellent tool, and especially in a place where you want to connect with people that just get it. You don't want to have to be explaining all the culture and, you know, being and experiencing multiple cultures within one community or within one nation, etc. There's just so many things that sometimes you don't necessarily want to have to be talking about or have to be teaching people about. And so I think the Muslim Youth Helpline have workers from different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences. So there's hopefully somebody out there for you. And again, she said that if you, the best way is also face to face. So, you know, if you really want to, you want to try and find somebody that you can trust or that you think, you know what, they're going to be your ride or die here. And that's Do you think that kind of summarizes that part of it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay. So I won't have to do that in the beginning of the podcast. But I think that's where we're going to end it today. This, I think, has been a fruitful conversation in terms of just laying the groundwork for it, and there is so much more to come. I had quite a few people respond to the comments that, or to the tweet and the not the Twitter, but the Facebook status that I'd left out, saying that if anyone has any resources or comments or concerns, questions, etc., that we want to talk about with respect to Islam and mental illness, so, and mental health. So it's definitely something that we're going to be having more conversations about in this podcast. So if you're interested, definitely keep a lookout for them. Sumayya, thank you very, very much for this conversation. No problem. And I look forward to a part 2. Oh, no, wait. I totally forgot. Damn. Sorry. Guys. God, clearly I failed. I had like a couple questions, just generally speaking, not to do with mental health. So these are some questions that I'd ideally like to ask everyone that comes on the podcast. And so the first one is, where or what do you find hope in? Because I think it's something that it's increasingly hard to hold on to. So what are some things, or where do you find hope in?
So I find hope in my future, in my family, and in my faith.
Nice. It's a good 3 Fs right there. Alliteration. Yeah. And
That's
then and then what's your favorite thing about Islam? Because we have enough of the negative views on Islam, we have enough of negative representation. So what is something that you really love about Islam?
I really love how Islam is loving. It's a simple statement, but
no, but it's a potent one. What?
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that, or do you want to just leave it at that and people can interpret it as they want?
Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Islam is loving, and that's Sumayya's favorite thing. And if you could tell your Muslim self of yesterday something, what would it be?
It would be, don't cry because Allah is always there.
Okay. But you don't mean that like in the sense that crying is a bad emotion. Like it's a form of strength. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
yeah, for yesterday specific, the thing that I was crying about was not enough to warrant the amount of tears that I spent on it.
Fair enough.
But generally, yes, crying is absolutely fine.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Like, we go through this whole mental health conversation, and then you're like, "Don't cry, people.
Don't do that.
You're so weak." No, it's not, guys. It's not a weakness. But yeah, I would agree.
I cry all the time. It's just that sometimes I cry like over things that I shouldn't cry about.
But it's released. You're done. At least you have that conclusion that, you know what?
Oh, and yeah.
God is there for you at the end of the day, and He won't ever give you anything that you can't handle. Exactly. I love, there's I think it's a Christian like a Christian poem or story or something. I remember hearing it as a kid, and it was like, oh God, you've always been there for me. Or sorry, there was like 2 sets of footprints on the sand. Yeah. And have you heard of this?
No, I have not.
So there's 2 sets of footprints on the sand. And so like whenever there was some calamity going on in this person's life, there were always 2 footsteps. But when I think his father had passed away, there was only 1 set of prints. And I think the second prints originally were his father's. And so it really affected him then. So there was only 1 set of prints. And so this guy is complaining to God. He's like, you know what? Like, you were there for me all this time. What happened? Why is it when I'm going through the hardest thing of my life, why aren't you there for me? And God replies, that's when I carried you. It's not.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's lovely.
It is lovely. It's just I love that thing. I mean, I had read it when I was younger, and but it impacted me then. But I love it still now. So God carries you in moments that you don't even know, and He will always be there for you. And finally, at the end of the podcast, I invite folks to pray for people or causes or actions, etc. So, is there anyone or people or causes, etc., that you want us to raise our hands for?
My parents. If you could, that would be lovely.
Well, I definitely can. I love them. But guys, you would love her parents too.
I think it's so important to be so grateful for your parents.
Yeah.
You know, they've especially mine. I mean, they've been by my side through everything, and I think it's important to appreciate, you know, your family, your friends, everyone in your life who's really important to you. So yeah.
Agreed. So why don't we all raise a hand in prayer for Sumayya's parents and all the parents in the world. And parents, you know, mother and father is not just biological. It's, I would consider, I have many mums. I have many fathers, right? I think with our family especially, we're just, we've got a lot of fantastic folks in the family. So whoever you consider a parent, I think we can pray for all of them. So I think that's I like that dua.
Thanks.
Yeah. So actually, thank you for doing the interview with me.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. This is, I think, the most formal we have ever been, guys. Like,
Our whole life.
I'm going to end the conversation and we're just going to go back to laughing like hyenas. So thanks for joining us, everyone. And I hope you had a great week. And I will see you next week with another podcast. Kudafis.
That's it.